Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. This is a horror podcast. We talk about horror things, so we could delve into such sensitive subjects such as child abuse, SA, R word, there will be foul language. Side effects may include entertainment.
Nausea, vomiting.
Hopefully not.
Car sickness. Yes.
And also, I want to take a moment to thank our Patreon supporters. Steve and I have both lived paycheck to paycheck, so we definitely appreciate how meaningful it can be to offer even $1 here or there. But that being said, Patreon does also offer a free tier. So even if you can't offer any financial support, you can still sign up for the free tier or do the usual things like liking, sharing, subscribing, or even writing a review if you're feeling squirrely.
All the fun stuff.
All the fun stuff. And with all the fun, mandatory stuff out of the way. Steven, what should we have coming down the pike?
Well,
severed heads. That's what usually comes down pikes. Severed
right.
Heads.
Yes. Not today.
No.
Next week maybe. they're in back order.
Damn evergreen.
You're right. Still doing three events weekly. Maybe looking at doing a fourth on our Discord server. There are links to the Discord server on our website. Actually, there's a Linktree page that has links to everything on our website. Not next week, but the week after, I will be going to AuthorCon in Williamsburg, Virginia, for that is the Scares the Care charity. Not charity. Well, it is a charity, but convention related to the charity. So if you're going to be out there, hope to see you there. Man, I am tired. We were talking earlier before we got on the hit the record. I got no sleep last night, so I apologize in advance for how tired I'm going to be on this. But today we are talking to Mr. James Ashcroft, actor, director, writer, best known for his work with Fresh Meat, Black Sheep, and Coming Home in the Dark. Welcome, James.
Thank you. Kia ora. Great to be here.
Yes.
Our pleasure. Before we get into the meat of the interview, you want to let us know what you're currently working on?
Yeah, I find myself in sunny New York and New Jersey, working on we're in prep for The Whisper Man for Netflix and Agbo. So I'm going to be Manhattan based for the next 8 months.
Very cool.
That sounds fun.
It's raining here. It's been raining here for the last 24 hours, which is part of the reason why I'm so tired. I'm guessing it's not raining there.
Well, it's the cloud is lifting. It's more of the sunny disposition rather than the weather itself.
Yeah. Sunny disposition in New York and New Jersey.
That's the only sunny disposition in New York. Is in the atmosphere, not the people.
You clearly haven't been there long.
I joke.
Yes,
New Yorkers are wonderful people. They're all great. I love them.
No, they're not. I went to high school in New Jersey. Fuck them.
Oh, wait, are we talking about New York or New Jersey? I mean, New Jersey, yes.
I'm kidding. I don't care. I enjoyed my time there. All right. So the main theme of the interview, we will be talking actually less about your body of work and more about your love of the genre, basically from childhood through adulthood. And then towards the end, maybe talking about any common themes that have been cropping up and how those themes maybe intersect with horror. But that said, it's not meant to be a therapy session. So if there's any questions that we ask that you don't want to answer, just say pass and we'll move on. But starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of childhood? That's the first time I've ever messed that one up.
Yeah, I know.
But starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Scary things in general. I mean, it was, the usual stuff. I grew up in a very, middle class, working class neighborhood. It was probably bullies first, and just sort of the adult world in general, I found slightly disconcerting.
I have to grow up.
Yeah. It's, and just not understanding that that sort of transition of such a sort of a hard line between, children and not being privy to the adult world, but at the same time you're dragged along to events, and you get to be privy to those sort of gatherings and not quite understand what's going on, but getting a sense of something slightly sinister, whether or not it really was just lurking under the surface there. So I think that's why I like Stephen King so much, because I felt like I grew up in a Stephen King town. Yeah, but
hopefully not Derry.
No,
Or
not Derry. Yeah, a little more Castle Rock
okay.
than Derry. So lots of antique stores. But yeah, it's a school bullies, teachers. There are a couple of. We were talking about this the other day, where they how many teachers that have been positive role models or had an influence. You can probably count on one hand, but there were a couple who were they were of an age and of a different time, so they had lived through that period of where like corporal punishment was allowed. I remember a principal in my primary school that I went to. I would have been at six or seven. He looked like a sergeant major from a British, Alec Guinness and Bridge over the River Kwai kind of. And he leaned over and he was looking at my work, and he said very, very quietly and looking to me directly in the eye, and he said, if you don't improve your writing, I'm going to dust your pants, my boy.
Thanks.
I just didn't understand what dust your pants meant. And so I said, okay, thank you. and he looked a little confused and he moved on. But it was I had to ask my dad. I was like, what does that mean? I think he meant he's going to give you a smack on the bum if you don't. But yeah, that was Mr. Patterson Green. Other than that, he was fine. But bullies and bullying and small petty power enthusiasts and authoritarians. I think I find that they've always been people I've noticed in life, because they're everywhere.
Yeah.
I grew up watching horror movies. So my dad's English, my mother's Maori. So he grew up watching Hammer horror and things like that, and he would let me watch those films. We used to have there were two shows. One was called the Sunday Night Horrors, which would that's where I first saw Tobe Hooper's Salem's Lot screened on that. But they would screen all the old Hammer horror films with Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, and Dad would let me watch them, and from a very early age would be those aren't vampires. That's a man called Christopher Lee, and that's not real blood. That's like tomato sauce or paint and things like that. So he sort of broke films down for me in that respect. I've never found films scary. I've found I've always been drawn to story and stories that are troubling, but I was never scared of films as a kid because I think I was exposed to them.
Yeah, and they were explained to you. Right?
Yeah. The sort of the craft, and Dad probably made up a lot of these things too. But the intention there was, he was a big movie watcher. He liked books. He always read to me. He was a big believer in no child should go to bed without a story. And so he would, movie watching was always a part of our relationship.
I'm not sure your age versus ours, but it sounds like I don't know if this New Zealand qualifies as the British school system, but it sounds like you've had a very Pink Floyd upbringing.
No, we never got served hot food. No pudding. Yeah. I mean, New Zealand is, there's many great things about New Zealand, but I'm always curious because, Italy has, giallo, which obviously rose out from, politics and religion and repression and sexual identity. And I always think New Zealand is such a, even though it's very progressive, it is a colonized country.
Yeah.
And like most colonized countries, those very punitive systems were brought with them in that way of thinking. And like a lot of places, New Zealand has a very, very dark history of colonization, but also how that shadow of colonization sort of continues to be felt and where it trickled down in terms of school systems, in terms of prisons. laws, exactly. Race relations have been influenced, but I mean, there's been a lot of change in recent years. But we had 26 of these sort of Borstal boys' homes for troubled youth homes.
Mm-hmm.
That came about in New Zealand as far back as like the 1950s, and now there's 4. That whole system's been abolished, though the current government is looking to re-establish boot camps, which is being met with a lot of doubt and scientific evidence on their effectiveness, but they're still moving forward. So it's again that shadow, that punitive shadow, just keeps on rearing its head every now and then, and that's what I think there's a flavour to that punitive nature in New Zealand horror. I find that's that's the scary side of New Zealand for me.
Mm-hmm. Understandably so.
But I myself had a very, very happy childhood. Very easy childhood. I just had a morbid fascination, I suppose, with the world. But that's and a curiosity there. But I always remember that feeling of the adult world being something slightly sinister because I didn't understand it entirely. I could sense it, and I think watching. I mean, I watched Blue Velvet, David Lynch's Blue Velvet, when I was 10 years old, which is it's not a film a 10-year-old should watch. But that made me sort of. That was probably the first time I had an understanding of maybe this is what I'm picking up on. That what's happening just beneath the facade of quiet, harmonious suburbia is incredibly ugly and lurid and very, very messy. Mm-hmm. And so that had a big impact on being a filmmaker and being a storyteller, but it really did. It was an opening into the world. My streets didn't look the same after seeing that film for me.
Did you witness anything in particular in real life that stands out to you as being of that type of situation, or just a general feeling?
No, it was just a general feeling. I mean, it was. I remember being on a bus going to school, and I remember the bus driver yelling back, going, "Who's got food? Who's eating on the bus?" And no one said anything. And then he pulled the bus to the side. He got up and then he went up to this kid and said, "Open your bag. I can see the steam coming out of there from your fish and chips." And he grabbed this kid by the scruff, like he was going to punch him. And everyone was sort of really terrified. And he said, open my bag. And there was nothing there. It was cold morning. I mean, you can't buy fish and chips at like 8:10 in the morning from anywhere. Right. And he just sort of, threw the kid down back into his seat and then went back and
no apology or anything. Just all right, fuck off.
Yeah, and just driving. But he was an older guy. He was probably in his mid 60s at that stage, and this would have been in the late 80s.
Maybe he was smelling toast.
Maybe.
But just that kind of children mean nothing. There's a complete hierarchy there, and the punitive nature of someone like this bus driver who I'm empathetic to going. He's obviously got a complex life, and that might be riddled with disappointment and bitterness or doubt or who knows what. But just the ease with which people of that time were like, okay, I can literally grab a kid by the scruff of his neck, hold him up, and threaten to hit him with a fist because I think he's got something.
Right.
And I'm biking with my friends, like an hour away from my home. I'm playing in like deserted lots or going, through farmland and stuff like that. It's just it made it thrilling, but looking back, it's also like, oh my God, thank God I survived. I'd never let my own children do that. I'd be, you don't want to be a helicopter parent, but at the same time, there was just that sense of freedom back then, and also with it, that's New Zealand has has a history of its crime like anywhere else, but it was crime was always something that sort of happened over there to other people. It wasn't something that you necessarily encountered, but looking back, it's just like no, it was a lot closer to the danger of that of the adult world than you'd like to think.
Yeah. And in some respects, I think that is still the case because, I mean, for example, in urban settings, as you kind of pointed out, there is still plenty of violence to be found if you're in the wrong place, and even in suburban environments, there are a lot of assholes out there, to be frank, and I can definitely see some adults, kind of giving this kid the eye, like, get out of here, I'll beat the shit out of you. I mean, Karens on YouTube all day doing stuff like that, so. I guess you just need to know where to look.
Yeah, well, it's the and that's the thing that's always interests me in anything is power dynamics, and obviously I think we're in a slightly tyrannical time at present, where the world going through some pretty big changes.
Some places more than slightly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you about Salem's Lot. You brought that up earlier. What did you like about Salem's Lot?
Well, I love the film. Had a big impact on me. The Tobe Hooper. Or miniseries, I should say. But again, I think it's that hiding at monsters, hiding in plain sight under a facade of respectability. I just love the idea of this, James Mason's antique dealer coming to town and sort of infecting everyone with Barlow in the basement. The town where I lived in, Paraparaumu, which is just outside of Wellington in New Zealand, it had a house on a hill. There's a big Catholic school and church on the other side of the train tracks, and on the top of the hill is a giant statue of the Virgin Mary. I don't know, 15 meters tall, and it gets lit up at night. And right next to the statue is a big farmhouse in the forest. So I think I liked it as much because it looked a little like the town that I grew up in. Again, there's that facade of like, this is a nice place to bring up your family, but there's just a feeling of darkness there as well. So there's a duality.
I was just going to say a juxtaposition between the statue and the wilderness.
Yeah, well, the weird thing was, because we were all used to it, but I remember being in a car with somebody who was dropping me off from out of town one time, and she suddenly screamed and hit the brakes in the car, and I was just like, what? Did we hit something? And she was just like, oh my God. And she's like, what is that? And it's like, what? But it was this glowing statue of the Virgin Mary in the darkness and on the hill. When she thought it was some kind of ghost had just sort of, materialized in front of her. So you kind of take those things for granted. But yeah, it's all that juxtaposition. It's all that duality of civility and something that might not be so civilized. Or a lot of it was an interesting town to grow up in too, because there were a lot of gangs in the town as well. There's sort of a number of gangs in New Zealand, but the longest community. And when they get, you don't necessarily see that gang presence on the topsoil, but you get through that a little bit more and you go, oh no, there's a big drug issue in the area, or there's a big drinking issue or violence, and it reveals itself in different ways. So I think that's stories like Salem's Lot, which obviously touch on sort of themes about never minimize, experiences. The bus drivers' sadism is just as great as the Marquis de Sades, or a romance is with the local waitress is just as powerful as Romeo and Juliet's. And that's I love that. That's what King often writes about, and that feels very real to me.
Okay. A lot of our guests have described there being a dividing line where before the dividing line, horror as a genre was scary to them, and then after the dividing line, it was not scary. It was maybe either enjoyment or pleasurable. And you did mention that your father had sort of, introduced you to horror and helped you interpret the movies and things like that. Do you remember there ever being something that actually did scare you?
A movie specifically?
Or book?
I think, look, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind would be The Thing.
Okay.
John Carpenter's The Thing, because that was the first time I had seen that level of special effect.
Mm-hmm.
It was confronting. It was in a visceral way. It was, but also, I think, just part of what works about The Thing is that it's this kind of unknowable, formless, ever-changing, unidentifiable mass that you can't quite get a handle on.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being, disturbed more than scared, but that level of viscera and it's very different from Hammer horror's ketchup running down the sides of Christopher Lee's mouth. And so that had a big effect, I think.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think probably, well, maybe not probably, but maybe you keyed into is, having talked about power dynamics. I mean, the power dynamics in The Thing are constantly changing. So you're always on the edge of your seat in terms of,
right.
So there might have been some of that too.
Yeah. I mean, that, and that's that older, and then there were none. Agatha Christie's sort of set up, and that is the thing, is that power dynamics are always, allegiances are always sort of shifting, and that's very human. I think one of the great things about The Thing is that cast. They're all great actors. They're all and they all find the humanity of what it would be like to be under that kind of duress. Donald Moffat being tied to the couch.
That was one of the first things I thought of when you mentioned great acting. That and even the man who played Windows, just they all portrayed their roles very well, and I never found myself at one moment, breaking that veil of I'm watching a movie.
Yeah. It was like, this is what it would be like to live with 10 men in the ice for 9 months. This is it's but that was a film which I remember having disturbing me. I mean, Blue Velvet disturbed me too in ways that I didn't quite understand at the time, probably. But that was a different kind of effect. But scary, I didn't find a lot scary, but if it was unsettling, I would often lean into it. Ken Russell's Gothic, but that had Gabriel Byrne and Julian Sands, and it was all a sort of a fever dream about the night in which Frankenstein was conceived by Mary Shelley. And I mean, it was an art house film, as they used to call them, but I mean, and a Ken Russell film. So it's he's always swinging for the bleachers in terms of how he demonstrates stuff. But it just had never seen anything like it, so it felt like a fever dream.
That actually is a good segue into a question I wanted to ask, which is in the childhood section here. Did you have any recurring nightmares or recurring dreams?
2. One was a recurring one, and then the other one was just a one-off, but I remember it clear as day. The recurring dream was often I was running over like a small hill towards my father, who was on the other side of the hill, and there was a fence made out of punga logs, which is punga logs. Punga is like a fern, a native fern in New Zealand, and we used to have them, in and around the yard and things like that. And sometimes people would make fences, but this giant fence, punga fence, running along the side of me, and it was that classic. I'd run over the hill to try and get to my dad, and he's not there. He's beyond another hill, and then run over that one, and he's still over another hill. So that sense of never being able to get closer, and I think he was waving at me. But this, for whatever reason, that giant punga fence felt very disturbing to me. And the other one I remember clear as day was I'm out in the schoolyard with everyone. It's lunch or interval or something, and kids just start screaming and running everywhere, and there's something is happening, but I don't know where. And I run into this, fort, which is sort of 2 tiers high, like a little castle turret.
Mm-hmm.
And I climb up to the top, and I see my friend Nathan coming up the ladder, and then suddenly he flips around, and I see his legs and his feet disappear back down, and he had on these like dirty green socks. And these socks sort of flapping as they disappeared down. And then up the opening comes this giant dark-coloured German Shepherd, and it had been eating all the kids.
Wow.
And then I felt scared, and then I felt calm, and then it sat next to me, and I put my hand on its head, and then it's slightly cold, and the wind's blowing, and the skies are grey. And it's just me and this dog at the top of this wooden turret. And then I'm moving away from that image. And that was the end of the dream.
Wow. That is a very vivid dream. Lots of detail. And yeah, there's layers there.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's kind of two schools of thought when it comes to dream interpretation. One is that they're symbolic of different things going on in our lives. Another is that you can interpret them literally in some cases, but the one that talks about things symbolically, that again can be broken down into two schools of thought. And one of them likes to interpret things in terms of saying that everything that is in the dream is a reflection of some part of ourselves. And your comment about the German Shepherd calming down and sitting down next to you and you putting your hand on it makes me think that maybe that's one of those, if that makes sense. I'm wondering if that symbolized some part of you somehow.
Yeah, well, I mean, that thing of tyranny. I mean, my wife likes to say, if the worst thing that could happen to you is if you ever got $1 billion. You just turn into an absolute asshole. And I agree. She's like, you with power, you wouldn't be able to, whenever we watch the X-Men and stuff like that, but with the family, it's just like, yeah, you'd be there destroying the world. You wouldn't be able to handle any of that.
What's the phrase? The road to hell is paved with good intentions?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The uncanny feeling from that dream specifically that sticks with me so much is going from acute panic, not knowing what's going on, to then feeling an absolute sense of calm.
Right.
And kind of feeling nothing with that dog. So I think it's relative. I mean, I have often thought about it, but it's not something that I've ever it's never had a great mystery to me. It's always sort of felt quite accurate in terms of what occupies my imaginative life.
Mm-hmm.
That duality. There's a word which I'm really drawn to from the Māori culture, which is porangi, and that colloquially it's used to describe somebody who's not mentally well. So it's often very informally used as like, oh, somebody's gone a bit crazy, they've gone porangi. But metaphorically, the definition, it splits the word in two. So po means night and rangi means day. So to inhabit that grey space between night and day, that's grief. When someone passes, you are under a veil of of sadness. So that can be mental illness. That can be corruption. It can be many different things. But being a metaphoric language, I was always inspired by that definition of that word, because I think that's the big theme for all of us in our lives at some point, is that that constant negotiation and reconciliation of the light and the dark within ourselves. And that's definitely something that I'm drawn to in especially my own work, or the kinds of stories that I tell. But I think that's always been there. That's the transition from adolescence into adulthood that I talked about earlier. That's sensing this, you're approaching a grey space where those clear cut definitions of right and wrong, good and bad, they're not necessarily helpful, or you feel they're, your awareness of the world is now more complex than that,
Mm-hmm.
Well, as another good segue, the next 4 questions come in 2 pairs of good and bad each. So starting with the negative so we can end on the positive, was there ever a time in your childhood when you were terrified of something in real life?
No, I was never terrified. There was a dog on our street, which, was just...
Was it a German Shepherd?
No, it was a Rottweiler. And then I found out it's this big, huge dog, and it would just always, you'd bike past it, and it would bark, and, the amount of times I fell off my bike, just from getting a fright. And then I learned that its name was Gog-Eye, which that took a bit of the sting out of the fear.
Doesn't it?
It wasn't Cujo, it was Gog-Eye, which I've never heard that name again. But that would have been the closest to it. But I mean, the thing that I remember being really scared about, and this obviously, you don't need to be an analyst to guess the connection there, was I was terrified of losing my father because I was so close to him, and that was always the driving fear of I lived with both mum and dad, and actually we live with them. My father, now we built him a little property on a little house on our property where we lived, my wife and everything, because after COVID and everything, it was like, well, no, we want to take care of him and mum. Mum passed away about 1.5 years ago. So I'm still very close to my father, and literally.
So flipping that last question around, was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt exceptionally calm or safe or at bliss?
Yeah, I used to. My next eldest, the closest sibling to me, my brother Murray, he was a good decade older, but he would go on these bike rides down to the beach, which was about a 45-minute bike ride every Sunday with his dog, and every Sunday I'd be like, "Oh, Murray, I'll come with you." Really idolized him. I'll come with you. And he'd no, and then of course, fine. So we'd set off, me on my little 10 speed, and him, me on my BMX, I should say, him on his 10 speed. And it would just take the longest time to get there, obviously, with a 7-year-old and an 18-year-old. I was slowing him down, and we would,
in more ways than one, maybe.
And we'd always go have fish and chips on the beach. We'd always go, build sandcastles, do all this stuff, and then we would always ride through the graveyard on the way home, which is on this route, and go and explore and look at stuff. I mean, sometimes he'd be like, he'd do that classic thing of halfway through, he'd tell me, start talking about, how there's ghosts or whatever, and then he'd bike off, and then leave, and I'd be screaming at him and stuff like that. And then it would inadvertently be, I could never bike all the way home because my little legs were too tired out. So it'd be me on Murray's shoulders with one bike under his arm, and then walking his bike. And every time, like, I'm never bloody taking you there again.
Right.
You always do this. And then the next week we'd do it again. Those were really special times that I just, I felt like I was doing something that the big boys do, but it was fun, and
it's nice.
Yeah.
It's like a wholesome kind of triple layer sandwich there. You have the going out with your older brother, looking up to him, and like you said, doing something with the big kids, which is fun, and then him scaring the shit out of you with the ghost stories, but then ending up with you riding home on his shoulders because he's the good older brother and he still takes care of you.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he would always sort of encourage my morbid fascination too. I remember on one trip we found these 2 dead seagulls on the beach, and it was sort of like, oh, what's and he'd like give me sticks to poke in them, and
again, wholesome older brother action.
Right,
look, a dead seagull. Here's a stick. What you do is you poke it.
Yeah. Okay, open it up, see what it looks like inside. And I've got other brothers who would have been like, Jesus, James, you're sick. Just away from that dead bird.
Taught you to spit off bridges and.
But yeah, Murray. I think Murray. Why I was so close with him, other than the age and stuff, that he was always a little. He was fun, and there was a real sense of like he didn't judge, anything. He was just, as long as you're not hurting anyone,
right?
Go.
That's already dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going into teen years, any particular books or movies stand out to you in your teen years?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably where I started, reading a lot more. Stephen King, Needful Things was a favorite of mine. The Tommyknockers was a favorite of mine. But also I read a lot of true crime. I discovered true crime in my teen years. So things like Mindhunter came out in like when I was about 17, I think, the John Douglas book. And I really, really got into, true crime, but also a lot of, procedural kind of books and things like James Patterson, Kiss the Girls, Along Came a Spider. And I remember, devouring those, but also getting interested in theatre and performance and acting a lot more. I was also started reading plays. That was another big thing. So. Okay. I really remember having an affinity for Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. I have no idea why. I mean, I think it was just the first time I was like, oh wow, this is when people yell at each other in a big argument. The content's pretty cool. I've never witnessed an argument as eloquent and witty as anything that Edward Albee has written, but. Just starting to get a sense of that medium, the power of the spoken word and dialogue.
Right. Usually the first couple things that come to the top of our minds often do so for a reason. So let's kind of go back to Needful Things. What did you like about Needful Things?
The townsfolk was, it was already primed to explode. It was, on the surface, it all looks good, but just beneath it, again, it's a town with its deep-rooted issues, and all it takes is someone coming in and giving it a little push, to send it over the edge, and it will take care of itself. He doesn't. So I really liked this sort of Machiavellian character of Leland Gaunt coming in and just going, let's just do a deal. All you're doing is throwing apples through somebody's windows, and you can have what you want. But that's the first domino that gets pushed over, and how it was a really probably the first time I'd sort of going back to that issue on interest in power dynamics of going, power is. That's what manipulation of power looks like. I mean, it's given a supernatural lens, obviously, but I like that it wasn't all, it wasn't all monsters and stuff. It was wheeling and dealing, and let the people, take care of it themselves. Let them immolate at their own hands.
What about Tommyknockers?
Oh, Tommyknockers. The conceit of going, there's something beneath the ground, right under us, that's been there for eons, and we're completely blissfully unaware of it, but its influence slowly starts to become known and starts to, again, activate the negatives of what already exists there. I think, and that's slightly, where I thought the thing was great too. It's that the idea that you could dig and find something spectacular and incredible, but, again, that be careful what you wish for, because what's the price there? I always any kind of, I've always been a bit wary of groups. I'm not a big joiner-inner. I probably prefer being on the fringe of things. But any kind of enthusiastic group, I'm probably prejudiced against, I should say. Or not prejudiced. I'm a little wary of.
Yeah.
That's not always the case. That's not always warranted. But I think, that was an element of the Tommyknockers that I really responded to, which is there's a whole bunch of people jumping on the bandwagon for something, and if you're not one of us, then you're against us. Yeah. And so I found that that's a confronting notion. That's a scary notion because we see that all the time still in different.
I'm with you. That is a big one for me.
Yeah. And the idea that, people that you could have had a relationship and been with for a very long time and known are suddenly changing and they're turning against you.
Yeah. I don't know about you, but for me, it's not so much the power dynamics of a large group of people. It's how erratic they can be and how quickly they can turn on a dime. That's the part that's scary to me. Like I get, it's like having a big rock on the top of a mountain. The rock by itself is not the problem. It's what,
It's the potential energy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's like that quote from Tommy Lee Jones from Men in Black. A person is smart and intelligent. People are dumb, panicky animals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any scary dreams or reoccurring dreams in your teens?
I do remember having a dream about, when I broke up with my very first sort of long-term girlfriend. Okay. She's saying, I'm leaving you, and sort of pleading with her. And then when the pleas didn't make a difference, I started to strangle her, but she's not affected by it. She's not choking.
Oh, in the dream, you mean?
In the dream. Yes, in the dream. I've never strangled anyone.
I was rather shocked for a moment.
Did he just confess to a crime on our podcast? No.
Yes,
I'd never strangle somebody. I'd do it through a different method.
Right.
Strangling is so inefficient.
But, just going that sense of she's completely unaffected by what I'm doing. It's not choking her in any way, but I mean that
powerless.
Yeah. Powerless, loss of control. And I remember that dream because I woke up sobbing, sort of, racked with those sobs. So
segueing into adult years, any standout books or movies or TV shows in your adult years?
A huge amount. I mean, we're a huge reading family. My three girls, my wife, and I read a lot less for pleasure now than I do for work. But I'm really fortunate enough to some of the most influential books that I've read and had throughout my life. I mean, I'm now working on as projects, which has been incredibly rewarding. So working on an adaptation with Eli Kent, who wrote Coming Home in the Dark and The Rule of Jenny Penn with me. We're adapting Coco by Peter Straub. We're working with Peter. He co-wrote The Talisman with Stephen King and Black House. As well as having a huge library of his own books. Peter's an amazing author, sadly no longer with us. But that was a book probably I did get introduced to that in my teens.
Would you like about it?
All about four Vietnam veterans sort of coming together and realizing that this series of murders that are taking place across two continents have been committed by one of their platoon members who is over there. So not so much a story about they have to go and catch him, but they have to go back and save him, and in turn save themselves or heal themselves with that part that they lost individually during the war there. So an incredible, thrilling work, but also the sort of heart and what it really, really is talking about, which is this sort of ongoing cycle of violence, which is handed down from one generation to the next, is what makes it so incredibly powerful. And that's the first book in a sort of a trilogy, an informal trilogy of books called the Blue Rose Trilogy that Peter authored. And so that was one of the first projects I got signed up to after Coming Home in the Dark. So that was a bit of a dream come true, really. And another book that had a huge impact on me was called When Darkness Loves Us by Elizabeth Engstrom, which I discovered when Grady Hendrix published Paperbacks from Hell, which was a sort of a coffee table book about the boom and bust of horror paperback publishing in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. This was just one of those books where you go, how have I never heard of this author or this book? It was an incredible piece. And I tracked down Liz, who lives in Michigan, and wrote her a letter and I said, this is what I want to do with your story and I want to bring it to the screen. And she said, great, you can have it.
Nice.
And so we're looking to go into production for that after The Whisper Man.
Excellent.
Yeah. So it's been really nice to be able to work on material that has been so inspiring to me creatively, but also as a reader. But I do have to be, there's lots of other books. I always start from a place of adaptation usually, but I have to be careful about, if something sinks its claws in, I get very obsessive about it. And, there's been a couple of times where, I've found a book that has, been so incredibly moving and, but I've been, someone's beaten me to it.
Before diving into maybe that direction, let's go back to When Darkness Loves Us. What did you like about that?
It's sort of a sleeping beauty story in many ways, all about a young farm woman, lives with her parents and her younger sister on their sprawling farm, secretly engaged to one of the farm hands, and unbeknownst to her is pregnant to him. And she gets trapped underground disused mine shaft, and when help doesn't come, she tries to find a way out by going through this mine, and she becomes trapped in complete darkness in this sprawling, huge cavern system underneath the farm, which is this giant lake under there and all these things. And then she emerges 15 years later.
Oh, what?
And that's when the real fun begins. She's, her fiance has moved on. He's married her sister. She looks slightly different now from 15 years of living on lichen and
pulled a little Gollum
things.
Right? Yeah, I'm picturing Gollum, like the classic animated Gollum, not Andy Serkis.
Yeah. It's and so it's sort of all about being in the prime of your life with all these things that you were promised, family, identity, love, and if you're denied those things, and the basic dignity of being part of a community, if you're denied those things, then you'll take them no matter what the cost. And so, again, there was a great duality with that character, and very, very moving, a very beautiful approach to all of the characters there. But I just never read anything like it, and that's what really captured my imagination.
Very interesting. So the next question I'm going to ask is going to be over your entire life, and not just about horror. It could be any genre. What movie would you say you've watched more times than any other?
Oh, it's probably going to be. It's hard. It's either Silence of the Lambs, and I don't know why I feel slightly self-conscious about admitting this, or Cliffhanger.
Well,
Stallone.
Stallone.
Okay.
Which is so lovely, kids, that I then got to work with John Lithgow, which was really the reason probably that I watched Cliffhanger. So Cliffhanger was just one of those films in my teen years that just went nuts about seeing. It was a fun, rollicking kind of ride. It was something that you just end up at any time you had a get together with people if we were going to watch a movie, breakout cliffhanger. It's just one of those films which I think got played. It was on repeat a hell of a lot for some of those years for no other reason than the pure love of, the ride that it was. Really entertaining. And, being a John Lithgow fan, and he was a hell of a lot of fun in that film, where Silence of the Lambs is, again, came out relatively around that period of time, but as a film is something that I've come back to again and again, more so to do with work as well as,
Right.
owning it and watching it. It was a big film amongst teenagers at the time and everything, but, a film of real reference in terms of it's cast a long shadow in the genre. It touches on a lot of the sort of interests that I had initially as an actor, and definitely as a director and as a storyteller, balancing that nuance, I think, of the entertainment, the procedural thriller, psychological horror genres, but fundamentally what makes it sing is its potency as a human drama that looks at all these really complex, strange relationships. And so that's something that I come back to a lot in terms of my work. So that's why that's probably had a longer lead than other films. And there are a number of films that have that same thing. But Silence of the Lambs, I remember seeing when I was 13, and that just, it just
sticks with
blew
you.
my mind. Yeah.
So the reason for that last question and this next one, the reason that we word it the way that we do is because it's going to do one of two things. You're either going to say something that underscores something that you've already said, in which case Silence of the Lambs kind of does, or you're going to share something that we haven't talked about yet, which, for example, Cliffhanger does, and give us a chance to maybe talk about something we hadn't talked about yet. In this case, though, it seems, as you said, Cliffhanger was mainly for, the entertainment value and it being a fun ride and something you could watch with friends. So maybe there isn't necessarily something to explore there, although you're welcome to correct me if I'm wrong.
Cliffhanger, films like Cliffhanger, Die Hard, which is ostensibly a stronger, better film, but they're touchstones for me because they really epitomize what entertainment can be at its best. That you can still have character, you can still have emotion, and you can still have high levels of spectacle.
Right.
Those films also, it's important. You can enjoy those in your lounge, but they are so much better in a movie theater, and that's where I experience them first because of that communal engagement and sort of push that you get from an audience experience when it's something that's a spectacle. I do think Silence of the Lambs is more resonant to me.
So the three that you mentioned here, Silence of the Lambs, Cliffhanger, and Die Hard. The next question is, so if those were the ones you've seen most often, would you say that one of those is your favorite, or would you pick a different movie to be your favorite?
I honestly don't. I don't have a favorite film. I have tiers of favorite films. They would all be in. Look, Silence of the Lambs would be in the top tier group, probably more than the other two.
Right.
But that's a tier that is wide and varied as well, but probably less so in terms of content and commonality with other things in that tier. I would say there's quite a common tone, theme, character focus in there. So definitely Silence of the Lambs remains in that top tier group for me.
Okay. Next question would be, do you see any kinds of common threads about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical?
The only common thread, I think, is there is nothing more frightening to me than my fellow man. That's, I love cosmic horror. I love, really like folk horror. But, the common thread through all of those things for me is there is nothing scarier than the lengths people can go to given the right pressures, circumstances, and motivations.
Mm-hmm.
And the unpredictability of what lurks in, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
I find very attractive in terms of as an audience member, as a reader, as a watcher, or as a filmmaker and a storyteller. And I think there's something very cathartic about it for me. There's slightly it's good to purge oneself through art a little bit, to exercise some of those, just get a little bit of a glimpse into what the worst case and best case scenarios are.
Yeah, it's a theme that's come up on some previous interviews before, I think, in the cathartic use of creating and viewing or consuming horror, in that it gives you like a temporary safe peek into horrific situations to entertain that part of your psyche without actually committing murder,
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's illegal, I hear.
Don't strangle anyone. It's I think it's art's always done that, and to give us an insight to the best of us and to the worst of us.
Yeah,
it's why I am a Shakespeare fan. But that's why I love Richard III so much, or Macbeth, because it's all about you indulge those wrong desires. Once the crown goes on, it's all downhill from there. This is the folly of man, and I love horror for that. I do love it. There's a lot of genres that can do that as well. Comedy, I think, is a close cousin, but I think horror has always had a strong foundation of exploring our morality and our mortality across medium, and from probably the beginning of time.
Yeah. I mean, there's like close contenders, like drama will explore things like morality and the darker side of the human nature. But I agree, horror leads the pack in that race.
We may come back to that in a moment here. So this would normally be the spot where we would summarize any common themes that keep cropping up, and then maybe talk about those a little bit. For you, it sounds like the three common themes that keep cropping up are, of course, power dynamics, duality, and also your relationship with your father. But I would summarize all three of these as either real life lessons, and a phrase that we used earlier in the call was how to navigate the world. We have joked about having a Joseph Campbell jar on this this podcast, and about to put another $1 in there.
You're up to like 28.
Yeah. How familiar are you with his work? Because I heard you chuckle there a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, big in the earlier years of my education at drama school and at university. I wouldn't call myself an acolyte of his. The hero's journey is the main one.
Right. I can't say that I am anywhere close to knowing all of his works either, but at least in this conversation, what I'm being reminded of is I think it was a speech that he gave that I've heard a recording of, referred to as the four functions of mythology, and I'll briefly give them here. The first one is mystical, evoking a sense of awe with the mystery of the universe. The second one is cosmological, which basically you're doing the best job you can of explaining what you do know about the universe. Third function is sociological, teaching us how to live in the society that we're currently living in. And then the fourth one is pedagogical, which has to do with how we as an individual find our way through the phases of life, like from, childhood, teenage, adulthood, middle age, old age, and the struggles with that. And I feel like the three topics that we're talking about here a lot in this conversation maybe touch more on the last two, sociological and pedagogical. Not sure about the first two, But, in terms of real life lessons about how to navigate this world and the society that we live in terms of value structures, but also people who violate those social structures or those value structures, that's reality. You have to be aware of that and cognizant of it, if not skilled at, dealing with that, if you will. Do you think that those are good summaries for the things that you find important in this genre, or do you think that there's something that you think is a better summary, or maybe something additional that we're leaving out?
No, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, all journeys are fictitious and or otherwise are about finding one's way through the
story,
through life, through the forest, through a story. And I think what genre, especially the horror genre, looks at it under an extreme lens often. So those events that people are trying to find their way through the stakes are immediately higher, or more, or there's a slight excessiveness to them sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I think any story that resonates has got to fundamentally resonate to the human experience, which can be hard when you want to. Can be tricky when you want to talk about some of the darker elements of society through a lens of horror. And often I find to do that. So, like with Coming Home in the Dark or The Rule of Jenny Penn, that one's dealing with the shadow cast by the damage of boys' homes in New Zealand, and Jenny Penn is talking about the rise of tyranny in the least likely of places. They're not exactly conversations people want to have because they're quite hard to have.
Because it's more visceral, it's more real.
Yeah,
it's something that actually happens.
I don't want to I never shy away from those conversations because I think they're the ones we need to have. But horror, just that lens of genre, is a way that we can sort of address them a little more directly. That said, that can there are constraints at times with horror, that there are expectations or from certain audiences about horror has to look and feel like this.
The next question, I think the answers may even be kind of self-explanatory, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. So the next question we normally would ask here is, why are these topics important to you? In your case, duality, power dynamics, and your relationship with your father.
I've never really thought about it. I think, I mean, my wife likes to say, you've done something really bad in a former life. That you're still trying to suss out before you can sort of move on. I don't think it's anything as dramatic as that, but I guess for me it's very much tied up with a pursuit of deeper empathy, without sounding lofty in any way. It's because the thing that my father has taught me is a sense of curiosity about the world, having a very empathetic viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
There are many times in my life that it would be so much easier just in black and white people or issues to be secure in that righteous perspective of I'm right, you're wrong, I'm big, you're small. It's black and white, and it's not, and that's never sat well with me. And trying to have a better understanding of your neighbor or the person across from you, or on the other side of the world from you, trying to find that common ground and understanding, I think is really all about getting to know oneself better. I think, and being empathetic and sympathetic to oneself is something that, if there's one person I need to become better friends with in this life, it's with me. And giving, no one's got the boot from me more than myself.
Can relate.
And look, I think the majority of people can relate to that. I think it's that constant, like I say, it's that porangi notion of that constant reconciliation between the darkness and the light within ourselves. And until you accept all of those aspects, you can't, it's very hard to move forward into a future with sort of greater empathy and positivity and hope.
I'm glad that you brought that word up again, because I wasn't going to try to pronounce it myself. But that's kind of where I was thinking that the conversation was going to go in response to that last question, is in that I think the more direct answer is more rooted in the reality of your own life experiences and the society that you grew up in terms of, both the power dynamics and the duality, and your relationship with your father potentially being the man most important in helping you learn your way through those difficulties in the society you were raised in. But these are universal experiences, dealing with power dynamics and duality. And so, then there's that conversation of how horror potentially is a mechanism to translate, if you will, that from the local experience to the universal, if that makes sense.
I think all story can fundamentally do that. Again, I don't know how to tell stories any other way, I suppose is what I would say. I agree with your assessment. In many ways, I wish I could just be a jobbing director and pick up whatever lands in front of me and run with
a commercial.
Yeah, I do. It would be a lot. My mortgage would really have a lot more respect for me. But unless it feels deeply personal in some way and relative to my experience, or I need to find a way into looking at it in that sense, I find it very hard to engage with a project. The Whisper Man, which I'm prepping here at the moment, which is a serial killer crime thriller based on the book by Alex North. I love that genre. I know that genre really well. I know some of the pitfalls of that genre from things that we've seen, and I've seen how, Silence of the Lambs, the best case scenario when you have a great thrilling piece of entertainment coupled with something to say. But the thing that got me over the line on it was that it is a story about the complexities in the relationship of fathers and sons. And there are sort of 4 different father and son relationships in this at the heart of this story. So obviously that's a very clear entry point for me, both as a father and a son. But also what really got me excited about that was going like, I feel like I'm interested in seeing stories about men as well, because. And for a good reason, I feel that those stories, there's been lesser focus on that in recent years. But at the same time, I think I'm interested in looking at how to take a much more empathetic view towards male characters as well, especially with the actors who are involved and the dynamics of the subtleties and the nuances and the complexities of relationships between fathers and sons. And to do that through genre and procedural crime procedural thriller is a really exciting thing. It sort of ticks all the boxes for me, but I need to have a personal lens on any kind of story that I'm involved with. Otherwise, I would be the weak link. I wouldn't be serving the films, serving the film in the way that it would need to be. So that, as I say, that's a really good thing, but it also makes me kind of picky. And I'm sure that's why I appreciate my agents. They're very understanding and respect my sensibilities. But I know that sometimes at the expense of easier commercial propositions.
I'm going to plug my co-host's comic book or webcomic and screenplay. He's been working on it for many years and has shared with me a couple different screenplays. And we are, what are we now at, like potentially a trilogy or 4 movies, including the webcomic that
it's a saga.
Yeah, nice. Basically culminates. All 4 movies end up culminating in 2 gods, one committing patricide as the ultimate sin, and it being then a reflection at the end of multiple other things that have happened in the other 3 or 4 movies that maybe kind of all synchronize at the end.
Mm-hmm. But it all does kind of cornerstone around father-son relationship. I mean, it's more of a no happy tales are in most of the saga. Right. So it's a lot of dark. So it's really a lot more of father-son betrayal. But yeah, I don't know. I find myself doing that in my writings too. Is just writing a lot of father-son dynamics. Maybe because I also had a strong bond with my father growing up, and I agree. There's not a lot of not diverse, but in-depth or more detailed representation of father-son dynamics. Yeah, nuance in films. You know, you have your typical, hey, let's go have a catch out in the backyard father-son thing. But yeah, there's not a lot of films that delve into that, and also a crime thriller on top of that.
Yeah. It's
I like that aspect.
It's I think it and Alex North, the author, with who Chase Palmer, the scriptwriter, worked with, has a really acute sort of understanding of that, and it's quite unexpected. But I think that's why the book, sold like gangbusters. It was, for want of a better term, the heart or the emotional heart of the story is what leaves the long shadow, especially in a saturated market of crime thriller literature, which there's so many possibilities out there to read. But yeah, I love that. I love that sensibility that Alex was writing about, and those are his questions too. Interesting that you brought up Ross Jeffrey before, because I know he's a great one for writing through genre and touching on some of those very, very personal, obviously, experiences and fears to great effect. I think that's when genre is at its best, whether that's film, television, or literature.
It's probably a good place to segue to one of the last questions here, which is why horror? Can't you explore these things in other genres, or do you? And this is where you guys were talking a couple minutes earlier ago, and I kind of cut in because I knew we were going to come back to this.
Yeah.
Is that something that you have explored in your body of work, or?
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't consider myself a horror director. I just consider myself a director. I'm interested in lots of different genres. I just find I always keep coming back to those genres of horror or psychological horror and thrillers because they do it so effectively.
Right tool for the right job.
Yeah. But that said, I feel the same way about comedy as well. I love comedy. I don't particularly love a lot of contemporary comedy because I feel it's that they're often it's just gags for the sake of gags over looking at what's the intention or what's the message beneath the form and the approach. And that's why I love comedians, great stand-up comedians, great raconteurs, because they do that, but I just don't see it being done as much anymore through the medium of comedy. But I mean, I'm working on a comedy drama with a friend back in New Zealand about the marching world, marching girls in New Zealand, which is sort of it's not the same as what a marching band is in America, but it's it's somewhat similar, and that came about just from the getting a glimpse behind the curtain with my friend who was a marcher, a world class marcher, and just going, this world is so unbelievably foreign to me, and most people, because it's a very, very niche world, but the canvas of what can get talked about in that world is huge, and that's where the potential is, and it aligns with some of my those core foundation interests that I have around power dynamics and people suspending their morality and just acting, and then dealing with the fallout. I'm very much open to many genres. Nothing's sort of off limits. I don't think I mean, obviously I don't get a lot of romantic comedies coming across my desk when you first
Thank your agents.
coming home,
Yeah, right.
coming home in the dark and the rule of Jenny Penn. But there's never say never. I'm just always looking for those stories that haunt your sleep. If they don't haunt your dreams, then they're probably just a good idea. I'm after something that leaves an impression or a scar or threatens your very soul, rather than just going, well, just don't go in the forest late at night when there's someone with an axe. It's
again a good segue moment here. Really, the last question at this point is: do you think that there is anything left to say that maybe we haven't asked a question about, or maybe you thought of something earlier in the call and then the conversation took a left turn that you didn't get to say?
No, I mean, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. It's fascinating. I wasn't expecting to, be reflecting on my childhood years so much on a Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon. But I know it's something that's always present in my work. But those, I think all horror stems from childhood too, from our earliest years. Those, that's where those biggest shadows are.
Yeah. We do see some different trends in the conversations we've had, but power dynamics is obviously a large one, and as you say, a lot of that stems from being a child, because when you are a child, you certainly have less agency and power than you would as an adult. But for some people, that does also then extend into their adult lives.
And that power is something of a key factor in defining self-worth, which I don't. I think I simultaneously believe in power, but also it's the most. It's not real. It can often be it's a perspective that you have on something, but it's fascinating. It's as I say, I just keep coming back to the stories that reveal the worst and best in us are the ones that I find really appealing, and the characters that demonstrate that always the most nourishing and fascinating. So but I think that's covered the majority.
I agree. Just wanted to give you the opportunity in case there was something that we either had overlooked or, as I said, conversation took a left turn kind of thing.
No, I appreciate it.
Well, again, thank you very much for your time. Before we let you go, do you want to let everybody know again what you're working on? And by the way, we'll put together a bio page for you on our website. I'll get together with you offline and get whatever you'd like for us to link there, bio, some pictures that we can use for promotional stuff. So,
Great. No, I mean, my film, The Rule of Jenny Penn, is in cinemas currently before it moves to Shudder here in the US, starring Jeffrey Rush and John Lithgow, and currently working on The Whisper Man, based on the novel by Alex North, here in New York and New Jersey, with Robert De Niro, Adam Scott, and Michelle Monaghan.
Very nice.
Nice cast.
Yeah. Good people.
Again, thank you. And thank you to anybody out there listening. Do please come visit us at horrormakesushappy.com. As I mentioned a moment ago, we'll have a bio page there for James and link to whatever it is that he would like us to link to. If you can, support on Patreon, or if not, tell a friend. And thank you very much.